They're going to redefine traditional objectivity in terms of something like strong objectivity, which is something like what Evan was just talking about. When we say that something is objectively true, all we are saying is that a bunch of people have accepted it as such, right? That has been the socially accepted standard of truth. But that doesn't mean it's not open to revision, right? So it's not traditionally objective in the sense that it's mapping onto something that will never change. And that's the part that's going to be really important for feminists, right? Being able to acknowledge non-traditional types of beauty, right? Non-traditional types of art, making sure that those traditional classifications were viewed as objective and thus kept out a lot of people, right? A lot of people have not been historically considered beautiful. A lot of people have not been historically considered artists, right? Or been allowed to showcase their work in places of things considered to be valuable art, right? So breaking down our notions of objective and subjective helps a little bit with that. All right, so I'm gonna bring us back now to some of these terminologies, right? So there's gonna be this study of aesthetics broadly, which is not only going to include these assessments of beauty, but is also going to try to capture some of those subjective elements, right? So try to bridge that gap a little bit between subjectivity and objectivity. You're going to see a lot of those efforts here, right? So we're going to have some people on the extremes, some people who think that beauty assessments or aesthetic judgments are all objective. Some people are going to say that aesthetic judgments are all subjective. But I think you're going to find a lot of people trying to talk about like what Evan was doing, right? Bridging the gap a little bit. Let's account for some level of consensus, right? We don't just want anything to be considered beautiful, right? Just like we didn't want anything to be considered knowledge, but we don't want nothing or to have that traditional exclusion that we've seen, right? So redefining that a little bit. So in terms of looking at what we mean by aesthetics, it's not just going to be noting that whether or not beauty or art is objective or subjective, but also looking at the feelings and emotions that are evoked by the individual, right? What role do those play in these types of judgments, right? So we saw that a little bit at the end of our section on ethics, the role that emotions might play. They're certainly going to play a role in aesthetic judgments, right? So the question then is, what type of role ought we to play? And here we think it's a good thing, right? We came from a place where people thought that emotions and ethical decision-making were bad, right? That bias is going to impede our ability to reason. But here, it seems weird to say that something is art or beautiful if it doesn't elicit an emotion from you, right? That almost seems like a prerequisite here, right? So in certain domains, right, we seem to like that aspect. Okay, so how are we dealing with this interplay between the subject and their feelings and the object, whatever it is, right? So there's going to be something about the thing. But again, I'm pretty sure someone sold something that was like empty space. I think this was another recent one of these things that was trying to challenge the idea of what counts as art. Like it was a pedestal with nothing on it, and they auctioned the empty space above it, and someone paid a ridiculous amount of money for nothing, basically, right? Take the money and run. Yeah, that's the sort of idea. So, right, is it something about the object? Is it just based on the person? Is it some interplay? That's what we're going to be looking at here, right? So trying to figure out what are our own intuitions telling us. And again, why does that matter? Well, we live in a world that places a lot of material and monetary value on beauty. Okay, so depending on what society and others think makes something beautiful and how we judge things, right, is going to have consequences, material consequence in the world, right? So these are not conversations that are, low stakes. There's a lot at stake in terms of talking about what we think is beautiful and what we think counts as art, even if you're not an artist, right? So some of the questions that we might be asking, right? What, if anything, gives an object aesthetic value? Is there such a thing as an aesthetic experience, right? A purely aesthetic experience? And if so, how does it differ from other kinds of experiences? So to make that question make sense, one of the things I often think about is sort of the contrast, or maybe contrast isn't the right word, but the contradictory nature of experiencing like a really beautiful, grotesque photo. Have you ever seen anything like that? Like it's horrifying, whatever the content of the image is, but it's a beautiful image, right? It's either beautifully painted or it's beautifully photographed. Have any of you ever seen a piece of art like this? Right? So where you're both, there's something ugly about it, but also something beautiful about it at the same time. No? I'm not seeing any reactions on faces. No? Okay. Well, I hope you experience more art in your life. Lots of interesting emotions to be elicited. But yeah, right. So there are often times where we can have, oh, great, Lunaria, you have an example? Please share.